Hey folks, welcome back to Tent Outdoors. My name is Alan from Season 10 of Alone. Today's video is the first recap of Episode 1, Season 11. Make sure you tune into my channel on Fridays because I'm going to do my best to get the episode recap out the next morning, immediately following the episode. You know, as I was getting ready to watch last night's episode, it kind of surprised me. It brought back a lot of feelings of nervousness and excitement that I experienced last year when I was watching my first episode. Because man, you don't know exactly the story that the producers are going to weave for you. Because you got to remember, we're instructed to film at least 8 hours a day, every day we're out there. And they're taking just such a small snippet of all that footage to create the story for you. And you don't know what that story is. You have no idea what footage they're going to select for you. And it's important for us as viewers to not judge their decisions too quickly, because there may be a lot of footage that's not shown that would kind of explain their decisions. That being said, my recaps this season are going to be solely based on what the viewers see, with the understanding that there's probably a lot of other footage that would have explained their decisions. So we can't judge what they did too harshly, understanding that the producers edit the footage a certain way. So first up on episode 1 was Isaiah, the game warden, the family man. Now Isaiah is confident he can take on this challenge because of his military training, and he believes he has the mental fortitude to take him far into this challenge. So Isaiah made a comment in the Before the Drop segment that he believed that this was the most talented group of participants yet. He might be right, but I gotta say that's a pretty bold statement, because there's been some extremely talented groups in previous seasons. So Isaiah definitely seemed a little nervous about the high populations of moose, grizzly bears, and wolves in his area. He came across a pretty interesting set of tracks on the beach that made him nervous, and understandably. There was a large grizzly track, but beside that grizzly track, there was a smaller bear track. And obviously that means that there's a mom with a cub, and that would make any person nervous. And he did mention that he's going to have a hard time sleeping that night. In his next scene, Isaiah talks about if anyone makes it 100 days into the game, that's the time when there's going to be 24-hour darkness. There was a moment in episode 1 where Isaiah kind of psyched me out. He totally psyched me. I was like, oh my God, he's going to tap. He was talking about missing his family, and the edit made it seem like he actually was considering leaving. But he seemed to recover quickly and went about his business for preparation. So Isaiah goes for a scout with his bow, and he got this weird nosebleed. And you can tell he was a little concerned about it, because he says, well, I'm 97.6% sure it's nothing to worry about. And he was right, and he went about his business for preparation. And he stopped eating berries. He goes, you know what? I'm not going to waste my time on small amounts of calories. I need to get some protein. Next up, we have William, the fishing boat captain from Labrador. What I really liked about his first scene was he just kind of stopped, gathered himself, and said, okay, what's my next move? I just got to relax. And he understood the importance of food procurement. And he got his gill net in the water right away before he did anything else. Now, according to the edit, he went back to check his gill net shortly after he set it, and there was a large pike stuck in his net. Now, unfortunately, the pike escaped as he was retrieving it from the net. Oh man, my heart broke for him, because I've been there and I understand that high level of frustration and silliness you feel when you lose that much food that quickly and you watch it just swim away in the water. I mean, I had a similar experience. I hooked a huge pike on my hand line, but I didn't make my steel leader long enough. And when I set the hook, I cut the line right on that pike's tooth, and I watched that pike turn around and just swim off into the deep, and oh, so frustrating. But he did a good job keeping it together. After the initial shock, he kind of said, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to dwell on it. And he moved on, and he kept a positive attitude, which I was really impressed with. So he definitely learned his lesson. And when you're out there, you're always making mistakes. It's impossible not to make mistakes, but learning from your mistakes and moving on is a really important part of the game. So the next scene shows Will kind of out and about, and he makes a comment about how he's already noticing his energy level is getting low. So he harvests some rosehip berries, otherwise known as itchy bum berries. I'm not going to go into details why they call them itchy bum berries, pretty self-explanatory. Then he comes across this shallow channel, and he looks in, and he sees that there's some small fish in there. I can't remember what kind of fish they were or even if they identified those fish. And he employs a technique that I've never seen on the show before. He gets a large stick and he smacks the water, which sends shock waves down into the water that stuns the fish long enough for him to scoop them out. And he does it a few times and he ends up getting 4 or 5 of those fish, which is like a pretty solid meal. Every calorie counts out there. That was pretty impressive. So next up on the episode we have Dub. Dub made a comment in the Before the Drop segment about how he wouldn't want to compete against himself. And that shows a lot of confidence in his abilities. So after the belly button lint scene, Dub has an encounter with a young caribou. And I couldn't help but think of Cade's experience from last season that he had with that caribou. And it looked like Dub may have been in range for an archery shot on that caribou, but similar to Cade, this year it looks like the hunting regulations do not allow contestants to harvest caribou. I mean, I just thought of how frustrating that would be for Dub and for Cade, being that close to a big game animal that early in the game and not being able to harvest it. So the next scene, they show Dub creating what I think is his permanent shelter. Now, Dub admitted that he didn't come into the game with a solid shelter plan, and he was just going to dub it. I really like Dub's shelter design, the way he dug out the bank for his back wall, and he made it small, he made it simple, because he wanted it to be able to heat up quite quickly, and understanding that he doesn't need a lot of room in there. It's simply for protection and warmth, and he's obviously not going to spend a lot of calories building a large, elaborate shelter. And having that back wall dug out into the dirt, there's a really good potential for him to make an awesome fire pit if the dirt allows for it. I'm hoping that he's going to dig into that bank for his fire pit and then dig a chimney straight down. So, I mean, he won't have to worry about shelter fires, and it'll just be a really simple, effective way to heat that cool little shelter design he made. Dub is definitely a character, and I think his personality is going to be entertaining to watch and good for the show. So Dub's next scene was at night in his shelter. He woke up, turned on his camera, because he heard a large mammal, most likely a bear, moving around fairly close to his shelter. And man, that's an unsettling feeling. You are alone and you're hearing a large critter, and your mind instantly goes to bear when you hear someone outside your shelter. So the next day, Dub works to reinforce his shelter because of his little encounter in the night before. He wants to make it a little stronger and safer to give him a bit more time to prepare himself with the bear spray if the bear does decide to try to get in his shelter at night. Dub also mentioned how he knew someone who had been attacked by a bear and actually got his face ripped off by a bear. Next up on the episode was Cubby, the boyer, the homesteader. He kind of reminds me of Jason Momoa and Biko at the same time. His first scene was great. I really appreciated it. How he mentioned his wife had told him to just stop and enjoy the moment. Super important to show gratitude out there. So the next scene, Cubby comes across a squirrel. He does a really good job setting up his cameras. Sometimes as an audience member watching the show, we don't appreciate how much time it takes to set up camera angles like that. He's got one on the squirrel and one on himself drawing the bow. So that was really well done. Unfortunately, he misses a little bit to the left and his arrow breaks. And I couldn't help but think, man, if he had chosen a carbon arrow, like one of those heavy carbon arrows, they're so much stronger than wood, and I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't have broken on the shot. I loved Cubby's quick, easy tarp shelter that he erected. He simply did a paracord ridge line and made a lean-to style shelter with a ground sheet to sleep on. Super effective. It's very similar to the one I made, and it's amazing how well that shelter works and how much little effort and time it takes to put up that type of shelter. Cubby mentions that he's just starting to feel hungry. I think this was on day 3 or day 4, and he picks a few cranberries to stave off that hunger, and he gets to work on his permanent shelter, which is going to be an A-frame design that he's building between 4 solid trees. Next up we have Michaela from Saskatchewan, Canada. She gets right to work putting up a quick, simple, effective A-frame tarp shelter, and she gets right to work making some really cool grass duck decoys, because she's seen quite a bit of duck activity at her site, and she wants to draw them in close enough for a shot with her bow. Now, when she first started making those decoys, I'm like, man, how are you going to make a good duck decoy out of grass? But man, when she was finished, they looked awesome. And when she had them in the water, kind of, and she did a shot with shadows, they looked really, really good. Now, Michaela is one of the few participants in the show's history that did not bring fishing line and hooks, and she is going to rely solely on her gill net to catch fish. So this time of the year, the river is very low, and you can really see that. At Michaela's spot, it even looks shallower than some of the other participants, and she was finding it challenging to set her gill net in the shallow water. And later on in the episode, they showed her moving her gill net, trying to find a better set in a deeper area of the river. Michaela has a ton of wolf tracks on her site, and she even found some bear tracks that were preserved under the water. They show Michaela waking up the next day to the sound of wolves howling in the distance. Pretty cool, but pretty eerie at the same time. She's walking up and down her beach, and she finds a small game kill. That could be from wolves, it could be from a marten, we're not exactly sure, but she found a kidney of whatever they killed laying on the beach. I think she said it was probably a squirrel kidney, and she smelled it. It smelled fresh, smelled good. She takes it back to her camp, roasts it, and eats it. So at the end of the episode, they show Cubby going for a scout/hunt with his bow and back quiver, and he's moving through some pretty thick bush. And something really bad happened, and honestly, man, I feel so bad for Cubby that this happened, and it was actually pretty emotional watching it. So he must have taken off his back quiver because it's getting stuck on the bushes, and he was holding it in one of his hands, and as he was working through the cover, one of the arrows must have slipped out of his quiver, and the knock end of the arrow lodged into the ground without him realizing it, and he stepped into the business end of his arrow, which is obviously the broadhead, and it lodged fairly deeply into his thigh. Now, our femoral artery runs up the inside of our thigh, and it looked like that broadhead narrowly missed his femoral artery. And that could have been a life-threatening situation. Now, with an injury that severe, Cubby had no choice but to call in and tap out. Man, I feel so bad for Cubby. He looked like he was a really solid competitor, but man, when you're out there, stuff happens that you just can't control. And from time to time on the show throughout the seasons, we lose people due to freak accidents, just like what happened to Cubby. Folks, thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for a recap of episode number 2. Till then, we'll see you next time.